Check, check. All right. Good morning. This is DINRG. Welcome everybody on Thursday morning, and we're about to start. So there's a few people still coming in, so let's wait 2 more minutes.
I need to say I'm not lazy enough to use slides. Marcus is too lazy for these slides. So either way.
Okay. Yeah, good morning again. This is DINRG. We are starting. Yeah, usual housekeeping tips. Please register with the Meet Echo tool and use it for queuing. And a quick note of the IPR rules that we are applying here. So it's basically we're expected to let us know in a short time frame if you contribute or see any IPR related contribution. And so we are following the IETF Code of Conduct. If you're not familiar with that, please check out these links. And then finally, it's always good to remember that, so we're not setting standards here. This is the Internet Research Task Force. So we are generally concerned with research that can help the evolution of the Internet. And so we don't make the standards here. If we publish RFCs eventually, so they are typically of informational nature or intended to facilitate experiments that lead to like more insights in the future. And then in the IETF, there might be standards coming out of these technologies. All right, so this is my co-chair, Lisha Zhang. I'm Dirk, and before we start, we need a note taker. So we tried to accelerate this by asking on the mailing list. So far, we haven't been lucky. So we absolutely need a volunteer, otherwise we cannot continue. Thanks. What's your name? Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, so this is the agenda that we prepared for today. So let's have a quick look whether anything needs to be changed or you want to add anything. So one piece of information, as you have surely seen, we are in a rechartering process. So we shared our proposed new charter text on the main list, and thanks for everybody who provided some feedback. And so today we'd like to come back to that, summarize the feedback so far, and yeah, have some time for further discussion. So let's keep some time for that at the end. Okay, so if there are no change requests, then let's get started directly. And so first on the agenda would be Mark Nottingham. And so we earlier shared his draft on the mailing list. There wasn't lots of discussion. So we invited Mark to talk more about his work on exactly these topics that we are looking at in DINRG. Yeah, right. So I forgot to say the usual thing, and please keep wearing your mask unless you are speaking.
Hello.
Yeah, you have to turn it on.
Hello? Lovely. Hello. I'm Mark Nottingham. I have a draft that's been around now for, I want to say, almost 2 years. And it started when I was on the IAB. We saw that centralization and decentralization was an issue that was coming up more for folks, I think. And from my perspective, I found it especially interesting that people were making arguments in the IETF in terms of protocol design or whether to approve a charter or whatever about either the centralizing or decentralizing effects of different proposals. And I really wanted to dig into that. And so I wrote a draft. It's changed quite a bit over its lifetime based on the feedback and the discussions that I've got, which I really appreciate. And the current version is split up into 3 sections. One describes what centralization is, at least for the purposes of the draft, and describes why centralization is something that this community finds generally undesirable, all the negative effects of centralization. And the second section describes decentralization and nominates some techniques that are sometimes attempted to use to decentralize a protocol, and it explores the limitations that decentralization has. How these effects are not always, these techniques are not always effective. And the third section makes recommendations for the IETF community about how we can and cannot affect centralization. You know, we, as we all know, don't have protocol police. So that, you know, it explores what can be done by the IETF community, but also tries to set some realistic expectations about what we can't do. That we can't guarantee that something will be decentralized or in many cases meaningfully affect centralization at all. And I had a lot of fun writing this draft because there's actually a fairly rich amount of literature out there about different kinds of centralization, not only in technology but elsewhere. And you can see that if you scroll through the references, I think. So this draft started, it's been individual for quite some time. I had a long-running discussion with the IAB about their adoption of it. Earlier this year, it's 2023, right? Yeah. They decided not to adopt it. I think you'd have to ask them the reasons for that. There were still some IAB members who were quite keen, but I don't think they quite got it across the line. So I took it to the independent stream, where it's currently under review. I've gotten a lot of really excellent feedback from my reviewers. And there's some really interesting diversity in the review set there, which I'm really happy about. So I'm right now incorporating that feedback. The current draft in Data Tracker is definitely out of date. The editor's draft on my site incorporates some of that feedback, and I'm hoping to get a new draft out probably in the next week or so, maybe even earlier, that will incorporate almost all that feedback. So if you see a new draft in the next week or two, that will hopefully be closer to the one that is published. In the ISE, in the independent stream process, you know, as Elliot reminds everyone who goes through it, there's no guarantee of publication, but so far the signs are pretty positive, so I'm feeling pretty good about it. Any questions, comments?
Jeff Houston. I think it's a good document in parts, but in other parts, you kind of wonder if it's trying to carry an agenda which is impossible. Mm-hmm. Consensus rarely exists in these kinds of spaces, and often it's actually better to advance a thesis which is right at the outset biased from a perspective as part of a longer dialogue than it is to try and come around to a document that doesn't offend anyone, which runs the risk of being bland, uninteresting, and inconsequential. And certainly parts of your document I found took a position, and particularly section 3, took a position and stuck to it.
Right.
The first part of the document seemed to suffer from IAB consensus hacking. And it was hard to discern the author's perspective versus its prior mangling. And I would encourage you to be bold, take a position and say, this is a position which is, I think, more ambitious in some ways and more helpful than trying to be bland and innocuous and, well, you know, this is the consensus, because I don't think we have it.
Right.
You know, the issues behind this topic are complex, deep, and varied. And I think almost anyone who's spent some time at it comes out with a unique position, and that's fine.
Yeah, I think you're seeing two different effects in evidence there. One is that the draft has been around for a long time. I've changed my position over that time to some degree. I think I started the draft with very muddy motivations in that I wanted to combat centralization and believe that we could do something about it. But at my heart, I knew that we were limited in what we could do. And I've become perhaps more dark on that as I've gone along and talked to people and looked at it.
You're fighting the inevitability of economics. Mark.
Exactly. and the second factor, as you so astutely observed, was I had a period in the draft where I received a lot of feedback which I felt obligated to incorporate. And I'm busily pulling a lot of that out right now.
I would encourage you to continue that trend. I think it's actually better to see an individual's holistic perspective than to see an amorphic and inconsistent amalgam of various anonymous perspectives that just confuses the reader like crazy. So be bold, say what you think. It would be my strong urging to you.
So I'm still inclined to leave in the section about why centralization is undesirable for this community, because I think that this community has agreement about that. And frankly, I think a reader, you know, if you don't acknowledge that, a reader will perceive the document as biased or ignoring part of the argument.
We could have this discussion about cause and effect and whether protocols cause or exacerbate an economic circumstance, and to what extent, I must admit, the desirability or otherwise in a market which has strong volume economics. And, you know, search is free. Why? Because it's run by a behemoth, but it's free. But it's run by, you know, and it's some of these, how do you balance these social perspectives? And you end up going, well, we don't like it, but how else do you get the benefits? And that kind of trade-off that society does all the time,
right.
It's difficult to expose unless you just say, these are my views.
Right.
Because any amalgam of other people's views just ends up the reader leaving jagged and unsure. I
think you'll be happier reading even the current editor's draft. I think the question is, how much do I pull out?
Sure. Okay.
You know, and where do I get? Because there is as I'm always reminded, you do need to murder your darlings when you're writing. But, you know, I think there's still some value in some parts of it.
I'm encouraged. Thank you.
Hey, Mark. Corinne Catt, University of Cambridge. I'm going to be the first one to admit that I haven't read the latest draft as these things go. But I was wondering about two things. What is sort of the current description that you use of centralization? And is there any particular examples of that you are especially worried about? Because what I have seen in the document is that you draw from a lot of examples, right? Cloud computing, DNS. And as an academic, I can't help but wonder how comparable and how different they are, and if it's the same type of centralization, and if we even need to be worried about these things in the same kind of way. And to give a bit of an example, for instance, for my postdoc, I'm going to be focusing on the dangers of centralization when it comes to cloud computing. And I think a good argument can be made that there are more dangers there than there, for instance, are in the DNS. But I'm also very happy for you to tell me that I'm wrong or that you have a different perspective.
So yeah, it's a very case-by-case thing, definitely. And I think the current definition in the editor's draft is something along the lines of it's a state of affairs where one party or one entity or a small group of them has the ability to control, observe, and now my memory goes, I need more coffee. But yeah, I've been encouraged by my reviewers to distinguish more between different kinds of centralization, especially economic. I think we could have a discussion about DNS versus cloud, for example. DNS, I see that centralization risk is largely mitigated by multi-stakeholder administration and some of the technical mechanisms, although there's still contention about that. Some people believe that's not adequate, which is, we live on a big planet with a lot of people, so that's not surprising. The cloud, to me, is really interesting. And if you want to go into the details, and I've written about this recently, actually, in a submission to the Australian Senate, of all places. If you look at infrastructure as a service, so just, compute, for example, that's switching is relatively easy in that market. I can go and take my image and stick it on another cloud provider and know that it's probably going to work and it's going to have a network, and I can turn it on and off and I'll have a console. And so I have a hard time believing that centralization is an issue there. It may be that we have one or two extremely large providers, but they feel the pressure of the fact that their consumers can go somewhere else if they treat them badly. However, there are a lot of ancillary services around that which are value-adding and making it a lot stickier, and that's where the issues are. The challenge is that, having briefly been employed to do cloud standards for a cloud company, that is still an area of rapid innovation, and it's not clear that they're ready for standards yet for some of those facilities.
Yeah, and as another point in terms of conceptually thinking about centralization, I agree with your point that as an individual consumer, it's probably easy to move from one cloud provider to another. But for instance, what I've seen in the UK context in terms of big educational institutions entering into cloud computing contracts and then getting in and getting really low fees and trying to leave, and oh my God, we can't ever leave them because look at the cost. So that works differently even depending on the institution or the individual level that you're looking at, I feel.
I see that not in terms of centralization, but in terms of unfair bargaining, probably. I think there are other mechanisms to regulate that kind of problem.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Marie-José online.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. It's interesting because Friday, I'm in Montreal, Marie-José Montpetit, I'm with École de Technologie Supérieure in Montreal, Canada. We had a presentation here on the effect of centralization on also data privacy and data protection, which I think Australia is particularly keen on, and also on the fact that hyper-centralization, especially in the cloud, was very much probably not eco-friendly. Like somebody said, it was a little bit in the context of AI, but it was in the context of data centers, and that hyper-centralization, here in northern Quebec, we have a ton of data centers because it's cold, but there's more and more laws everywhere that request, especially in Europe, that request the data to be kept within national boundaries. The US also has that requirement, and the centralization in cloud-based infrastructure forces these data centers to be located in places where energy is not very green. So I think I read your document, and I think you could add this spin on the fact that this hyper-centralization is also not taking advantage of all the edge capabilities that could be put together and federated to provide maybe similar services if the protocols obviously were different. There's questions of security, there's questions of protocol, there's questions of discovery. There's all kinds of stuff that us people in the edge networks have been talking about for years, but it is related a little bit to this idea that decentralization may also be good for the planet.
Well, first of all, I can't agree that Australia is interested in privacy, at least not enough. It's a well-known issue that we have. But anyway, I don't know if I can agree either about centralization and the effects you're describing. It sounds more like they're an effect of legal constraints. That you know, the data localization laws are causing people to put machinery in places they wouldn't otherwise. I mean, cloud people will argue that centralizing all that compute in one place or a few places gives them the ability to get economies of scale on things like their use of electricity and cooling and all the other facilities. So I don't think it's that clean cut. I think it would be, you'd need to dig a lot deeper.
And what I saw Friday, actually, I should share it with the group when I get it. But what I saw Fridays, there were studies that were showing that, of course, if you need to keep your data in the US has very little hydropower. And somebody could say here in Quebec or in Sweden, where there's a ton of hydropower, it's probably very good to put all the data centers here. And yes, there's economy of scales and there's everything. But on the other hand, I always, well, and it's personal, I always had the impression that there was a lot of edge capabilities that could be used to provide a lot of the services that are now being hyper centralized and could be maybe helping in decentralizing. But it's when I get the study, I'll share it because there were good numbers there. So thank you.
I would emphasize my draft does talk about some of the effects of centralization, but the main focus is on how this community relates to it and what we can and cannot do about it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Thank you. It's a topic that it gets a lot of people, I think, very. A lot of people are interested in it for economic reasons, for legal reasons, for privacy reasons, for ecology reasons. It's a topic. It's kind of very timely.
It is, and it's quite broad, which is why I'd like to try and narrow down different aspects of it.
All right. Yeah, so I followed the evolution of your draft over time, and I've also found it quite interesting. It kind of seems to reflect a journey that many of us went through. So from a like slightly more techno-optimistic angle to facing the economic realities. And so there's not a direct question on your draft, but since you also talk about you know, what could be done, what cannot be, shouldn't be done, perhaps. Of course, one question that could be of interest in this group here is whether you have any, say, recommendation of, say, IETF type of work that we should tackle.
Yeah, that's one of my to-dos for the draft, is to kind of, you know, outline potential next steps, and I'm still noodling on that. But yeah, there's obviously more to be done. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on. If we have another Mark in the room, Mark McFadden. And he's going to talk about effects of internet consolidation. And if you
all right, thanks. Mark McFadden here.
if you want, you can use my clicker.
I'll just let you do it. Is that okay?
Fine.
So this is basically a rewrite of a draft that I had done in 2022, along with my co-author. This is a little different from Mark's draft, or the intention is to be different. The intention is to talk about effects. And so in this particular case, the goal really is to talk about what the effects and sort of analyze how consolidation has changed the internet. That's the fundamental thesis behind this. So a little different from Mark's draft. Some of it is the same, and I'll have you go to the next slide. Let me say that one of the things we wanted to make clear in this draft is that the co-authors believe pretty fiercely that protocol design has demonstratively real effects on centralization, and we're seeing that expand over time. In this draft, we make a distinction between centralization and consolidation. I'll come back to that. And then another central thesis of this draft is that centralization has really changed the way we deploy services on the internet. I should take a step back here at a meta level and say that Marcus worked on his draft for years, or it feels that way to me anyway. It probably feels that way to him. And while he has that now at the independent submissions editor, the independent stream editor, this document's really targeted at a research group. This is really targeted at this research group, and that's its intended destination, to contribute to research about centralization. So next slide, please. One of the things that this draft does very early on is acknowledge the fact that there's a tremendous number of people writing about internet centralization right now. The IAB has done some. Yari Arko wrote a draft a couple of years ago. There's Mark's draft. But one of the things I think we need to acknowledge is that there's a lot of work going on here. That while today on the agenda it's the Mark and Mark kind of show, we need to really acknowledge that there's a tremendous amount of work going on out there. And some of it's in the IETF, like Mark's draft, and some are targeted like this one at the IRTF. But we've also seen other work targeted in other forums. And Jeff was at the microphone just a few minutes ago. He's written some great blog postings that are really worth taking a look at. The point here is that, and again, in this draft, we acknowledge that it's very hard to miss the fact that there's lots of people thinking about this. And so, and it's not just engineers and operators. There's a broad community of internet consumers, providers, operators, and protocol designers that are thinking about this. The authors think that there is an important distinction between centralization and consolidation, and there's a section in the draft about that. And one of the things that we try to back up is that decentralized technology, like the stuff that we research in this research group, does not by itself guarantee decentralized network outcomes, right? That's not enough all by itself. And we think that that's important in the broader context of having a conversation about centralization, but we also think it's important for the research group and its charter, and we'll talk, that's obviously on the agenda here. We think of consolidation as an outcome, and you'll hear me later talk about it as an outcome that's not just an economic outcome, but it's actually a combination of motivations that causes centralization to take place. And here's my slide about that. Centralization as an outcome really is, in many cases, an economic reality. We see that all the time. But we argue in this draft that it's also an outcome of protocol choices. And so it's not just a matter of economics, and it's not just a matter of economic clout by a few major players that have economic reason to take advantage of that, but it's also engineering efficiency, protocol design, and reality. The draft is towards the end of the draft argues that centralization changes architecture. I think this is a really important thing to say here at the IRTF. It's an important thing for the IAB to hear. This is probably not a necessary outcome of protocol design, but it is what has happened in the last 10 years or longer than that, to be honest. And so in terms of the recent evolution of the internet, what we see is that principles that were true 20 years ago no longer hold true now. For instance, we'll talk a little later about the end-to-end principle, but one of the things that we see in the last 2 years in the IETF is this concept of intermediaries serving certain functions that never appeared before. We've always had proxies, but we haven't had things that sit in the middle of the networks and provide services in between to an end node and the device providing services to it. There's a section in the draft that talks about the end of the end-to-end principle as an example of that architectural change, and talks about the emergence of certain kinds of technologies. And the examples that are in the document are things like OHI and Privacy Pass, and technologies that we know of and that the IAB right now is talking about in terms of privacy partitioning. The fact that we divide up the services on the internet so that one end doesn't know much about the other end. And so I think the changes to the architecture are one of the reasons that we think that this is a fruitful topic for research. Here are the case studies that are in the current draft. One of the things Mark said about 15 minutes ago was that you could pick on a huge number of case studies, and you could have a whole paper devoted to case studies of centralization. These are the ones that are in the draft. And they're picked because they are examples of different kinds of protocol design that have as an implication the effects of centralization. Finally, to finish up my part of this, one of the things that we're really focused on in this draft is the effects. So not focusing so much on describing the causes of centralization, but more interested in what are the effects of centralization and the implications for things like the fundamental architectural decisions that we make in terms of protocol design and engineering. It also, for us, has an implication for the research group's charter. We'll talk about that later. We think that the authors think that the implications here move far beyond just research. I think that there are implications for protocol design as well. And some authors have argued that protocol design cannot actually change economic events, but the authors don't believe that's true, and we try to make a case at the end of the draft that that there's a warning here about actual real protocol design and its effects on centralization. And I think that's it from me. Yeah. So this is, as I said, this is a 0.0 draft. It's actually a rewrite of some work that we had done in the past. And what we're doing is truly looking for comments and looking for suggestions. One of the things we don't want to do in this space is duplicate the work that other people are doing. So Mark's work is outstanding, I think. We don't want to duplicate that work. And that's why we're focused here on effects. And there's, maybe I should be careful about how I say this, but we think that there is a broad landscape of research to be done here. And in our draft, one of the things that happens is that we don't make prescriptive suggestions, right? We don't actually say the IETF should do X, Y, and Z. That's a difference between our draft and Mark's draft. And I'm interested in comments about that, whether or not it should be more prescriptive. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Thanks, Dirk.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So we have a couple of questions. Hagwang is the first one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for your presentation. I'm quite interested in your draft, but I just searched through the Google and can't find your draft online, and also not available. Yeah, on the IETF. Yeah.
So it's in two. I mean, you can easily find it on the IETF data tracker if you just search for that text, and it's also in for this meeting.
Yeah.
It's in the materials for the meeting. It's actually in a PDF along with Mark's draft as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Rio.
Hello, Rio Yanagida, University of Glasgow. Sorry, I did not expect that would be what shows up on the my Unicode would actually show up on here. So I'm so sorry.
It's nice.
I did not mean to. I will fix this by the next session. Right. Sorry, I've not had a proper look at the draft yet, so I'm sorry. I apologize if I missed anything. You mentioned the sort of the protocol design driving the centralization. And I've always thought that like one of the things that happens at IETF was interoperability. That's the thing that we really care about, I thought. And I think you wish that was the case, but then I'm assuming you've saw an example that isn't the case. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that and, you know, perhaps help me learn here.
Sure. I have a couple of words to say about that. So I think the IETF is still one of the most fundamental things that it does is ensure interoperability. But what I want to do is distinguish interoperability from protocol design that gives economic players the opportunity for dominance. So whether that's engineering dominance because all of the traffic flows through a certain network, or it's economic dominance because all of the capital and money flows through a certain network, what we're seeing is the development of protocols that have as an effect the ability for large-scale companies to exploit the protocol and become dominant. And not to pick on a particular protocol, but when you think about a protocol like Privacy Pass, which is being standardized right now and is actually in use, one of the things that happens is that there's an intermediary in between you, the consumer, and the resources that you want to take advantage of. Placing those intermediaries in the network runs the risk of those intermediaries being controlled by a very small number of players. And while the entire network connection is still going to be interoperable, right, what happens is that in the center of that network conversation, what we're seeing is the ability for certain companies to exploit that for certain reasons. In this case, it's privacy, right? What we're trying to do is not allow a server or a organization to collect huge amounts of data about us personally. Privacy Pass does an excellent job of that, but what it does do is it actually puts an organization in the center of that conversation. So end to end, it's interoperable. The IETF still does that, still very good about it, but what's happening is that the intermediaries in between allow for opportunities for exploitation.
So is that sort of more how to, the way these new protocols that are effectively only realistically be implemented by these large corporations as a sort of to be in a center, like by design, it's only feasible by a large company to be in the middle to enable any of this to happen effectively.
So in some cases, some of those protocols actually require a small number of companies to be in the center. And there are cryptographic or engineering reasons for that. But it also leads to the fact that those protocols can be exploited by very large companies.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Colin Perkins. If you go back to your list of example protocols, you have a set of relatively recent, a set of relatively recent privacy-focused protocols as your examples. And I agree that these are reasonable examples of the types of sort of consolidation and centralization effects. I think the IETF has been developing the IETF has been developing protocols that require in-network intermediaries for a very, very long time. How are these protocols different to earlier protocols like, for example, WebRTC or SIP or the email protocols or so on? Or are they different?
I think they are different. Our draft maybe doesn't do a particularly good job of showing why they're different from older protocols. When you think about HTTP, we've had HTTP proxy since the 1990s, right? I mean, for 30 years. So we've had intermediaries.
We've also had things like SIP that require an intermediary rather than HTTP that has it as an option.
SIP's a good example of the engineering design was based on a particular need, a particular requirement, and it was to make connectivity look more like a traditional telephone connection, right? And then provide services on top of that, and that's why SIP got so complicated. I would say that our observation is that the newer protocols are especially the ones that are doing things like providing certain kinds of protection for end users, right? They seem to be easier to exploit in a way than the older protocols that you're mentioning. But I think the draft would do well if it actually explained that, and that isn't actually in the draft.
I think it would be an interesting discussion, because a lot of these older protocols have also led to significant consolidation in the marketplace.
Yeah,
there's very few email providers, for example.
Yeah, Colin, the one that just leaps to my mind here is SIP, right? That's a really good one to talk about.
Well, SIP and email and WebRTC have all led to some fairly significant consolidation.
Yeah. So I think that if we pick email, I would say that the consolidation wasn't a result of protocol design. That's the difference I would say there. Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to discuss the differences and why you think a certain set of protocols are leading that way, whereas certain others are.
So that's an excellent suggestion, and I'll take that back. Arnaud.
Yes, hi, Arnaud today. So just to rebound on the previous question, I'm just trying to find an answer here, but I think this is, I'm particularly looking at ESNI, which should be ECH. Decentralization comes from the fact that you cannot make ECH if you are not a CDN. So it's not just a matter of here, you are right. The end-to-end interoperability, the answer you made to the previous intervention is absolutely correct. But there is an underlying, by design, choice of the IETF, because some people don't like network security at the network infrastructure level. They want it to be managed at the content level, and this is why they are looking at it from the CDN side. So the issue is that it's one direction. We can debate good, bad, whatever, but this is creating a significant centralization issue. Right? Imagine when you are, for certain use cases, like you are a company, for example, an organization, and you start to see suddenly your flows, the only point where you can apply security, because that's the forgotten element in this story, the compliance security that must be done by these companies, you can only do it at the CDN level. So go back to the discussion about you are a French company on energy in a nuclear power station, and because you are forced to go outside now for different reasons, you must go 4G and 5G, and you must go that. Your flows, the only moment where you can intercept your flows are at the CDN level, which is not in country. I can imagine that's going to create a massive set of issues for a number of people. So yes, I understand the argument that ECH could be optional for them, but you know who is going to be the first ones exploiting that? The malware guys. The cyber criminal, we find this a fantastic opportunity for them to actually do something with it. So we have other issues there that, for example, resiliency, security. What happens if these centralization places are breached? And from my point of view, it's not if it will be breached, when it will be breached. So otherwise, I think it's a very good paper. I would agree with Colin that maybe we can improve that part, but frankly speaking, that's a very good analysis from my point of view. Thank you very much.
I'm Alexander.
Yes, I'm before you in the queue. Sorry, just quickly. So I think it's actually interesting discussion. So it's like the different say properties of these protocols, and also causation versus correlation when it comes to centralization. But for SIP specifically, I think the keyword is federation, right? So I mean, SIP, like email, is a federated network, and interestingly, at some point, so our previous suite of multimedia protocols were not deemed good enough for fast product development. So that's why WebRTC was developed, which then probably really had some factors that led to centralization. I was just, I mean, I'm always interested in trying to figure out, so what could be good topics for this group to work on. And so since you mentioned like the OHI work, for example, I mean, so Mark Nottingham also correctly pointed out, okay, we don't have a protocol police per se. On the other hand, there are always technology consequences that are perhaps not really discussed enough. And so like OHI in particular, clearly also has led to some controversy, say outside the IETF. So like telecom operators were not happy with a certain vendor's OHI product, let's say. And it also had some, you know, user, say, oriented problems that you could actually discuss. So do you think these could be topics there for this group, or how should we go about this?
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to Mark talking about next steps in his draft. I think my vision of this is that there's still a lot of work to do in terms of defining the landscape. And this draft is really targeted at the effects of centralization. That's really its goal. But I think the landscape of what you can talk about it in centralization and make concrete and useful suggestions to the IETF about protocol design, and that's the goal, right? Is that number one, make concrete and useful suggestions to the IETF in terms of protocol design, and number two, document what's really happening so that the IAB, when they do think about architecture, thinks about the way that things really are. And sometimes I get the feeling that sometimes when we think about the architecture, we're locked into a picture that's 20 years old, and the situation is very different. I think research in this area is not good just for the research, but for the concrete and practical things that can deliver to protocol designers and people thinking about architecture.
Alexander Railan. I just want to put an idea on the table. Just like as of not that long ago, in most drafts, there is a section called security considerations. We should perhaps start by increasing awareness and making it mandatory to include a section called centralization or consolidation considerations, such that people become aware of it, and there's an explicit incentive to talk about it and make it a part of the review process. And perhaps then, a couple of iterations later, we will end up in a world where, you know, things are better than today.
Well, I like that. RFC 3552, which actually has the definition of what should be in security considerations, is very old. It's 2002 is when it was published. But I think there is something that is, I think that those considerations that are on the back of the boilerplate for drafts and for RFCs need some reconsideration. We have IANA considerations, security considerations. Sometimes people put in human rights considerations, right? And so I think a rethink of the way we do the back of that boilerplate is long overdue.
Yep. Reconsider the considerations.
Reconsider the considerations.
Colin Perkins as IETF chair. Whether or not that's a good idea, this group cannot propose it. That's out of scope for the IETF.
Thank you, Colin, and I won't go into why that's a bad idea. I would encourage you in your draft to focus, as was being said earlier, on in these case studies, on the connection, the causality, because and like so you talked about privacy pass. I think that's a very good exploration, and I've heard concerns about what the balance is there. Certainly, for some of these other ones, it's more tenuous, and I think you need to establish that to be credible.
Okay.
And one of the things that my draft points out, and I'm relying on many other people, this isn't just spun from whole cloth. Centralization is a very political topic, and it is used to make assertions, not to make the internet better sometimes, but to either consolidate power or to shift power to someone else. And so we have to be conscious of that, because if you're vulnerable to those kind of criticisms, the bottom falls out of your argument. So yeah, I'd encourage you to be very concrete in these about the centralizing effects and causality in such. I think that would be a meaningful contribution.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. First of all, thanks for the suggestion, and that's a concrete and actionable suggestion, so that's great. I will say that the Privacy Pass example is interesting because the designers of the protocol recognized from the beginning that there was a problem, but went ahead anyway.
Right.
And in fact, in the chart, if you look at the charter for Privacy Pass, there's a paragraph that talks about a deliverable of an analysis of the centralization features of the protocol. It'd be nice if that were in other charters. And I take Colin's point that we don't make concrete recommendations to other, other parts of the IETF, but I will take away your suggestion about more concrete linkage between protocol design and the effects.
And I think, just following on from that, it is a major work item to explore this relationship between privacy and, mixed nets have been around for, the idea has been around for a really long time. And, so this is kind of one of the fundamental limitations of our world is that one of the few techniques we have to obfuscate traffic is to mix it all together. But that has a direct relationship to what we're talking about here. And so there's a balancing that needs to happen there and some judgments, and also the acknowledgement that, not standardizing it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen.
Right.
So, how can we make the world better with the tools that we have in our hands?
And I take Jeff's earlier point when he was commenting on your draft that, and these kinds of trade-offs we make in all parts of our lives all the time, right? This is not specific to protocol design, and I think we should acknowledge that somewhere.
Okay, final comment on this.
So that's Diego Lopez. just a reflection while we were listening to you and Mark. It was that we're talking about a direct causality from design into increasing centralization. And I was wondering whether we should not consider as well another aspect. That is how design has to evolve as centralization happens without being intended or even without being necessarily connected with the initial design decisions. You make things in a world in which there are, 100 different entities willing to provide a service. And then in 5 years' time, for whatever the reasons, there is only one or two. And then probably a redesign would be desirable. I don't know if this is something that you are considering, planning, or whatever.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, especially for moving forward. I think one of the things I'm taking away from this conversation from Mark and from Colin and from some other comments is that we've had intermediaries in the network forever, right? It's just there seems that there is a qualitative difference now. And the draft needs to, our draft at least, if it's focused on effects, needs to make a concrete linkage between what has changed about protocol design and what effects does it have. The reader needs a strong link there.
Okay, yeah, thanks again, Mark. It was, I think, quite useful. Good discussion, everybody. Thank you. Let's continue.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just, did you upload your slides? Okay, I can't just see them. You may have to share them from your PC.
Well, it should be on the server.
Yeah, there's some latency when they show up here. So
I can see it on my server if you want that to. Can you try out something?
Yeah, so but they're on the tracker, but Meet Echo doesn't see them.
Okay, how do I show it on my? How do I use my laptop?
You can just use Meet Echo from your PC and then share from your PC. Open them in PowerPoint, for example.
Yeah, that's PowerPoint.
Right, and then in Meet Echo you can do share screen.
Oh, I see.
Yes, yeah, that's a bit of a Meet Echo data take a sync problem.
screen. Where is your screen? Yes, which screen to share?
PowerPoint.
Where's my PowerPoint? This one.
This is charter discussion. Or entire screen, then you can just do full screen. If you just, so this is Chrome tabs, but if you do entire screen, then you can run PowerPoint in full screen.
Yeah, so
Click share, and then go back to PowerPoint. Click share.
click share.
You can't? Oh, I go click the screen. Doesn't. And now you go to PowerPoint. First, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Okay.
So this is actually way easier. Maybe I should just sit down here. I had long wanted to talk about the end-to-end argument because lately there have been lots of discussions whether it's even still relevant. But for this time, there's a particular trigger. This is quoted from the internet draft that Mark just described briefly, where you can see that this on the section 6.2. The draft stated that the end-to-end principle is the idea that reliability and trustworthiness resides at the end nodes of networks rather than in the network itself. And after many words, I think at the end of the subsection, it is stated that rapidly the end-to-end principle is becoming the edge-to-edge principle. And this triggered even stronger statements that I recall from another presentation. This is actually a pretty popular one on the YouTube. I think it's at least 1,500 views. And I quoted to say that the 38 thumb up, there's no thumb down. So clearly there are people who actually share the mind of the presenter. Whoever interested, you can click on the YouTube link and take a look. It's a quite interesting discussion. And in particular, I quoted one slide out of that talk with my picture on it, saying that I coined the word middle box, but I must claim that I made the words, I didn't create middle box myself. The why I coined the word, this is about in the late 90s. That's because I actually had a long history with this end-to-end principle, so-called. So what created the middle box is as described in that talk. This is basically the abstract out of the talk, saying that over the past 2 decades, the internet's runaway success has caused this end-to-end architecture to be eroded by organic proliferation of those middle boxes, NICE, firewalls, IDS devices, and performance enhancement box proxies, CDNs. So talk about my long history with the end-to-end principle. This is a book. Now, this is a paper that everyone knows about it. This paper, I think currently people read the version published in the ACM in 1984. But if you read the small print, the early version actually was published in early 1981. There's even an early version that I actually read. That's published in April 1980. So I went to MIT for my PhD study in the fall of 1981. And this paper, I mean, this actually report by Jerry Salzer was one of those things I read in my early days. So exactly what is end-to-end argument in system design, and how we should treat that today. That's what I want to share with the group and to trigger some discussion. I want to tell you that when I arrived at MIT back in 1981, of course, there's no middle boxes. The network was straightforward, just delivering packets following the routing protocols. There's no address shortage yet at that time, so no NAS. Very few users, therefore there's no traffic overload concern. There's no content distribution, and there's no replicated servers to deserve a load balancer. And the security concern has always been in people's mind. But there was a big question of exactly how we could secure the network communication. And besides being pragmatically, well, there's no immediate threat at the time, and therefore there wasn't, as far as I can tell, immediate actions. So therefore there's no firewalls, IDS devices, things like that. So at the time, there were lots attempts trying to so-called enhance the middle for various performance reasons. None of them succeeded or succeeded at all. I think that's the mostly kind of explained in that end-to-end principle article. I saw with my own eyes at the time. The backbone of the internet was the ARPANET, and the ARPANET was designed to assume there's a reliable delivery from the entry IMP to the exit IMP. And therefore the host that runs the NCP protocol didn't take care of the reliability, and people got burned many times because ARPANET could fail as a promise. But even if ARPANET succeeded in the delivery from entry to the exit IMP, still between the host and the entry IMP, or otherwise the other end, there's a bunch of issues. I think the paper described that really well. But things changed very quickly in the mid-90s. And that's where I coined the word called middle boxes, because I noticed that there's a bunch of things that just suddenly overnight showed up. They actually manipulate the packets, as opposed to the previous situation where routers merely doing forwarding instead of interfere with where packet goes, even to the degree of changing the packet itself. So today, we have tons of middle boxes. Everyone knows about it. And I would have to say the internet wouldn't work without those middle boxes. So we have to have NAS, of course, with long out of addresses. And we have to have proxies dealing with performance enhancement, and not to mention mobility. We have to have better utilization of network bandwidth, because after so many years, we haven't figured out how to do datagram routing using multipass. Then load balancers and protecting the end hosts and services. So I learned this new buzzword called MAAS, mitigation as a service. Again, personal view. So I'm giving this talk as an individual, not as a take off my co-chair hat. I posed the question when Mark was talking, whether the architecture actually changed or the deployment changed by adding all sorts of patches onto the existing architecture. So maybe this is something we can have a conversation about. So what's more is that those kind of middle box services, in particular the last two, the CDNs and MAAS, many of the security enhancement, DDoS mitigations, increasingly provided by the dominant players. So I think they are part of the factors into the observed consolidation that we have seen. So exactly what is the end-to-end argument? And if we can have a better understanding of that, then we can see whether we still need it or not needing it. I wanted to highlight the few sentences I put in the box. So this is all entirely copied from that end-to-end argument paper. not in the abstract. That's what often people quoted. This is on the page 2, the beginning of the page 2. So therefore, the statement side, in reasoning about the choice of where to put the functionalities, the requirements of the application provides the basis for a class of arguments, which goes as follows. The function in question can completely and correctly be implemented only with the knowledge and help of the application standing at the endpoints of the communication system. Therefore, providing that question the function as a feature of the communication system, including all sorts of middle boxes, is not possible. And this is my basis, as I stated in the email exchange. I think end-to-end principle remains essential. The question is, what is that of those functions that cannot be replaced by the boxes in the middle? So I think I just want to open this for discussion. Look at the popular middle boxes I listed earlier. I call it as really the deficits of the existing TCP/IP architecture. That's how you run out of addresses. You have to have proxies. So the question is that if the question is whether there's actually practical design issues that cause the existence of those middle boxes, or otherwise, there's actually the architectural deficit that resulted in the shortages in supporting the functionalities that today we patch up by using middle boxes. And in particular, I wanted to point out, I'm out of time, that some of those, in particular the last two, right? So they are not really the middle boxes as sitting in the middle to improve the performance, but be aware or not, they actually cut directly into the end-to-end securities. How does the CDN works? It literally intersect the TLS connections. So are those MAS boxes. You want to hire those boxes to mitigate against the DDoS attacks directly coming to you. You have to share your private keys so they can de-encrypt the incoming traffic in order to sort out good traffic from the bad traffic. So therefore, the middle box is not just performance enhancement. They cut directly into end-to-end security. Just one thought to put out. I think that the functionality that can only be provided at end-to-end level, I believe, is the security. For example, like today, we don't have distributed applications. My typical example is I always pull off my phone and everyone else has one. I ask the question, why can't your phone directly talk to my phone? If I shoot a text chat message to you only, why can't this go directly? This is not a physical connectivity problem. We have Wi-Fi, we have Bluetooth, you can develop any other things. LoRa maybe go too far distance. But the fundamental problem is that my phone is not going to talk to your phone. There's no security relation directly in between edge devices. So how we secure communications today? TLS to the sky. And this picture is more or less at the meta level, looks similar to what I saw back in 1981, where there's only mainframes, and each of us got this dumb terminal. You have a wire connected directly to the mainframes, and everything done is over there. Today, it's no longer the situation where you don't have powerful edge devices. I think my iPhone is probably more powerful than the mainframe I used back then. The problem is that we do not have security primitives that enable the edge devices directly communicate with each other. How would going to the sky solve the problem? TLS. I would every time I got onto a web, I was authenticated by my Gmail address. And then you type in your password, and everything else become a single sign-on that Google will provide authentication and hopefully the secure connectivity between me on my behalf with any other web services. And I think that is a problem. Another thing, lots of people do smart homes. So the question of why are smart homes not stay at home? Instead, it's all controlled by the cloud servers. Can we have the smart homes stay home? And that would be a much better way to protect your privacy. IETF had lots of activities about privacy. If I throw out this challenge, if you can make your smart home, the control stay home, that would be huge privacy improvement. I think that the early discussions talk about the cloud services. We love cloud because cloud shows you the economy of scale. I used to do backup everything myself. You no longer to do that. You just upload actually transparently. You don't have to take care of that. The question is that utilizing cloud service is a different thing from being controlled by the cloud. I can utilize the storage services by putting all my files in the encrypted form. And the service provider, the storage provider, had no say about what I store there, who can share, who can see my stored files. And that is the cloud service. But like my identity assigned by Google, my interaction with other web services is introduced by the Google. I think that is a control. So how do we get from here, that is being controlled, to there, using the service and not being controlled? I think that is the question the DINRG group should explore the solution space. I think that's the end of my, yeah.
Thanks. So while others are thinking about their questions, I have maybe one comment. So when you look at these middle boxes a bit closer, I mean, they are not all the same. So like the early 2000 middle boxes, so like TCP optimizers, video optimizers, all these things, I mean, they are largely obsolete by now due to the rigorous application of encryption. And so these CDN type of middle boxes, they are a bit of a different nature, you could say, right? So they're not like transparent in the path and do something that is bad for maybe protocol evolution and so on. But technically, like CDN and media over quick relays and all these things, what they are technically doing is that they terminate an end-to-end connection, but it's just at the CDN proxy. So technically, well, these are just the two ends, maybe your client or your browser and the CDN proxy. So there's a proper TLS termination, quick connection termination, and so on. So it technically this is just the end-to-end that you are talking about. It's just that the overall system is composed of several of those steps. So it's a bit of a different beast compared to these like early 2000 middle boxes. I'm not even sure middle box is the right term for these things. And from a centralization perspective, of course, there are also other consequences. And I think you mentioned the question of control in the end. And so they are what we seem to be doing now is building like more and more like of these overlay infrastructures that are technically using the end-to-end principle, but the overall systems are just more complex in the end.
Well, if I jump in the queue, I don't know if this is still utilizing the end-to-end. Like the talk I mentioned, there's no more end-to-end because your TLS even intercepted by the boxes in the middle. So,
well, technically, I think you could say, well, the cloud provider delegates the TLS authentication to the CDN.
So then there's no more secret, right? If I want to have a secret exchange with you, there's nothing there to support it.
Yeah, thank you. This is Haiguan from Hua International. I would like to share my personal view on this topic. Why we cannot have an end-to-end encryption today? I think there are two main reasons. Firstly is we don't have a global IP address. Mostly, for example, when I at home, my mobile phone connects to my Wi-Fi routers, and the IP address is a local IP address. Yeah, this is the main obstacles. The second one is we don't have identity. When we want to set end-to-end encryption tunnel, for example, when we use the TLS, we need a certificate inside. But nowadays, as the individual users, we don't have the certificates. Even if, for example, we can have the PGP public key, but PGP public key have a difficulty in the key distributions. So that's why we can't have end-to-end encryption pipe. So unless one day we can assign credential to each individual users, and then we have a global IP address. I think the app developers, they will have motivation to develop applications for us. Yeah, thank you.
I fully agree with your assessment that the lack of direct device-to-device communication is due to the lack of end identity and end certificate or otherwise trust relations. But whether the end identity need to be an IP or IPv6 address, I think that's questionable. Currently, the certificates are issued by and large to names, not addresses.
Yeah, actually, currently, most of certificate issued based on the domain names. But as a person, I don't have a domain names. Yeah.
You can get one cheaply.
As a person, you don't have an IP address either. As a person, you don't have an IP address either.
But think about IP addresses. I hate to jump in. Sorry, Colin. I posted a message to the 116 attendees. IP address is so dynamic, changing hand all the time. That's why in day one here, my address, my email got blocked because Switzerland, I think the Switzerland addresses got used by IETF116. And somehow Switzerland got onto the blacklist. And therefore, part of the world blocked that IP address block. I think it's like a 31.133. And hence, I lost the email connection. So addresses are dynamic, fluent, as opposed to your domain name identifiers.
Yeah, maybe one day each user should have a domain name by his own. The issue is currently the domain name we need to pay. Everybody had to pay to purchase domain names. If, for example, if we have a domain name and we can update our IP address dynamically. If for example, I move to the other countries, I just use my app to update my domain name resolution record. Then you are able to have a global IP address, right?
I'll save the answer later.
Okay.
I think there's some very, very interesting questions about naming and identity here. The relation, some of these choices for naming definitely drive centralization and some definitely don't. I think you perhaps want to be careful what you wish for if you want to give everyone a unique name that can be assigned in the network. I think the discussion of end-to-end argument is interesting. We always run into the question about what are the endpoints, and I sometimes wonder if a lot of the problems we have are because we have insufficient terminology. We're trying to employ the terminology from the early eras of the internet when the endpoints were relatively well defined, to the modern network where they are perhaps less clear. I wonder if finding better terms would avoid some of the confusion. And Colin Perkins, by the way.
Okay, next I have Richard Lee in the queue. Are you online or? Okay. Sorry.
I raised the hand earlier, literally, and thank you very much for the presentation, lots of information. But I'm so surprised to have someone like you to present it, because for me, and CCN, ICN, that kind of research, it's a clear violation of end-to-end principle. Like we can argue like for or against it, because when we send something, we don't even know like well it's going to be terminated. It's going to be terminated. It's not at edge, maybe somewhere in the middle. And even if you change that to the edge-to-edge principle, but that's not my point. My point is that this principle has been around over so many years, like since David Clark proposed that. But right now, internet was designed and deployed to solve real and practical problems. So my point is that it's not important anymore. So we have to go beyond it. There are also some real problems in the reality. For example, and sometimes, but I believe that's because of the end-to-end principle. For example, I can share with it. A real operator told me that they are deploying base station along the highway from downtown city to an airport, because this highway is so wide. So on the left-hand side, that network of base stations belongs to one operator. On the right-hand side, belong to another operator. So when you drive on such a highway, so your latency is high or low, because it always changes, because you would connect to different sides of the base station. Because currently we are deploying services at the end here. So obviously, and even if you get the same service, same operator to provide the exact same service, they still get the same latency because of the end-to-end principle here. I thought about it, assuming, and we use something like ICN or CCN, that kind of technology, so that, and no matter you drive closer to the left-hand side or close to the right-hand side, you would get almost the same latency, that kind of thing. So I stand here, I'm not debating against that principle, because it's real. There are tons of examples in support of that. So meantime, I also see some other direction, some values of violating that principle. As I quoted earlier, CCN, ICN, example, and also in the base station there. Thank you very much.
Should I think we are running a bit out of time if we discuss this in too much detail.
Yeah, but let me give a quick answer to your long question. I think CDN is a violation of end-to-end principle, because there's a third party sitting in the middle between the data producer and data consumers. ICN, I'd rather say, name the data networking, NDN, is actually building the end-to-end principle back, because the data is secured at the producer and verified by the consumer. And as a network, it merely you distribute the data. And to scale the data distribution, that's why we're focused on data rather than on the connection. It is a connection that made today's internet dissemination not scalable. That's why we need all the CDN boxes to help out. I think that the fundamental clarification is required. NDN, ICN, it's about data, not about connection. And data is secured end-to-end, period.
Okay, so let me argue it this way, right? So in end-to-end principle here, we have to define what the N is. But in a like a traditional like IP networks, we know that N it is. But in ADN and ICN there, we actually do not have. We don't know where the N is.
It is stated very clearly in the end-to-end argument paper. It talks about application, the application context. That's where the end is.
I know. Let me just spell it out. Suppose they say, okay, Lisha, give me a pen. Just one example. So here the N is you, me here, and then so give me a pen here. And then if I say, okay, can someone give me a pen? But someone here, I don't really know who he or she is, because I don't even know who actually has a pen here. So I'm just asking the whole network here. So here is the end to network. It's not end to end. You see my point?
Richard, I think there's a basic concept clarification. We probably need to run an ICN tutorial to clarify
how
those
do
things.
you define the end here?
Right. So this is, I'm sure, really interesting discussion. But I'm sorry, I can really see some misconceptions about how ICN really works. But we don't have time to discuss this in this meeting. But we'd love to come back to that with you. But let's take this offline.
Yeah. Thank you. So Arnaud Tadei. So first, on the contrary to Richard, I'm very happy for you presenting this. Honestly, I need to digest this document, but I find it refreshing that you come back on this history about end-to-end. I think it is giving good light to the centralization issues. I do have, I would need more clarification about one slide that is, and probably this is the morning, I think it's slide 9, where you really explain the requirements of the application, provide the basis for a class of arguments. I think this is probably would require more examples perhaps or definitions. The thing that actually Colin mentioned about email in the previous intervention, and the point you make on the last slide about smart homes. Interestingly enough, I've been in IETF long time ago when IMAP and so on were designed. And the people who were designing it is, unfortunately, Mark Crispin passed away, but I'm still working with John Myers, and I remember Bill Yeager when he was at Sun Microsystems. When we did IMAP, at some point, Bill came to me and said, "No, we made an absolute mistake. Because now we are offering a chance for centralization." And he took exactly this example of this that you took on the smart home. He said, in fact, when you look at people normally, you have perhaps 100 people around you. At that time, you had people around you that you really care. So your address book would be limited. You really need to have an exchange with these people or in your home. Rather now, what we do, the metaphor is, we have the bits are going through a narrow line. They arrive to a highway. On that highway, you've got tolls, you've got all sorts of things, and you have to rush between trucks and between all sorts of things to get your data. And then you come back and you have, again, all of these things to come back, and then you arrive home. Why are we doing this? So I think you really ask an interesting question that comes from like nearly 30 years ago, if I remember correctly. So, of course, I'm concerned about another problem, which is security and the unfortunate, let's say, how can I put that word? The unfortunate prioritization of privacy at the expense of security at the moment, which is a real concern to me, because right now we are, when you speak about middle boxes in this context, it took me a very hard time to accept the idea that the people who are doing security middle boxes are actually attacking, and that's the right word. We are attackers to the protocol because the protocol refuses to see security. So anyway, my point is to say, I think you are asking a good set of questions. there would be a lot of discussions about that. Thank you very much.
I think you brought up the issue about security and privacy. That's a great topic, and I'd love to talk to you about it. So please contact me, and we can set up a time to discuss that.
Thank you much.
Okay, so we have Marie-José online.
Yes, hi. I do have a question. So us, the computing and the network people, are always shut down with the fact that by adding computing, we are breaking the end-to-end principle. And I kind of disagree with it, but I keep having people telling us that, yes, because we're essentially changing headers and, you know, putting some computing, we are breaking the end-to-end. What's your position on that? Alicia.
The question was, in which way would in network computing possibly break the end-to-end principle?
I think we are a little out of time, but let's talk about that. That's again another great topic. Exactly,
okay,
I think Colin asked the question, where is the end?
From us. Yeah.
Eric Nordmark. So yeah, that's a great topic. So I think we've thought about the end-to-end argument in various contexts over time, and sort of one of them is where are the actual ends, given that the computers have gotten more and more disaggregated, and sort of what are the contracts between different parts of the system as you disaggregate. Because even in the most simple cases around reliability, ignoring the integrity part, which is interesting as well, but the fact that, you know, some data lands on a web server, well, yes, but that file it's writing is actually lives in some network stored somewhere and using some other protocols, right? So clearly the data that you reliably deliver doesn't actually get reliably stored on that server. It gets stored on whatever, fiber channel, S3, whatever, NFS, anywhere, right? So that's one of the things that where I think what Colin pointed out, saying, yeah, do we have enough of sort of a taxonomy, a way of actually talking about the stuff, and then bringing that into the integrity / security discussions, right? Do we know what we're talking about? When is this a composition where I fully trust my proxy, whatever, CDN thing, because it's really what I consider being the end, and the fact that it does something behind it, I don't care, right? As opposed to, no, it's really interposing itself in my end-to-end conversation. Those are two very different things. So, and I think that affects what we think are ends here. So.
Yeah, I think it's very much a policy decision. Whether you trust the CDN, whether you not trust CDN, maybe it's up to individuals. Yeah. And therefore, we should support different policies instead of just one. Trust the CDN. And that requires we be able to tear apart exactly where the end is.
Hi, Colin Perkins. I think Eric said a lot of what I was going to say. The ends, it's back to security and control. And the ends are not so much a physical place as who is in control of the code in different places. And a lot of the issues with the computer and the network protocols is that the security model is very poorly defined currently.
Okay, so yeah, thanks everybody. So that sounds like an excellent topic we should get back to in one of our next meetings. So we now have 25 minutes left and still 2 items on the agenda. Mark's taxonomy work and the rechartering discussion. If it's okay for you, Mark, can we start with the charter discussion and then see how much time we have? Great, thank you. Let me bring that up quickly. Okay, so yeah, quick summary of the thoughts and discussion on the charter so far. So I don't have to talk very long to this, but just to get us all on the same page, this group has been around since 2017, and so quite similar to also what Mark Nottingham talked about. Well, in the beginning, there was lots of interest in trying to assess the utility and applicability of all these decentralized technologies towards the internet, and so there was different types of contributions on that. And then at some point, well, people kind of realized, okay, I mean, this is sometimes really interesting research, but quite often more like point solutions that address like a very specific problem. Often these things are not really intended to say the internet as a whole, and so most of the blockchain inspired approaches, for example, you cannot really use them to like decentralize like say core internet infrastructure. And so over time, we got more interested in like a systematic analysis of internet centralization, and also the discussion outside this group on new threat models and the economic root causes. And so overall, that seemed to be like a really important field that so this whole community, IETF hasn't been doing enough on. So there have been some activities, workshops, and so on, but clearly there was more interest in continuous work on this. And if you remember, we had this what we found really interesting and really productive workshop in 2021, where many of you participated and contributed, and so many good observations from that workshop and from the discussions there. Just maybe let's just focus on the bottom part here. I mean, we discussed all these economy of scale arguments, but also then the economic, there's a really strong economic drive towards centralization, and also the real significant problems that arise from that. And so that kind of, so in that light of this focus and all this interest in these topics, so since we have been working on this now for quite some time, we thought, okay, let's make our charter reflect that better, and so really express that we want to work on this say analysis, identifying, but also finding ways to mitigate internet centralization. And so what we proposed was to really maybe also should probably avoid the words centralized, but have like one place in the IETF community as a focal discussion point. So where that we maybe then have also more say substantial and hopefully impactful work on this. So talked a bit to the IAB. We had the IAB review this week as well. And so our idea is that we want to really simplify and focus the charter, maybe also rename the work, the research group to just decentralization of internet research group. And so these were the work items that we proposed in the new charter. So just like really focusing on the like key items we would like to focus on. So measurements of internet centralization and the consequential society impacts. So what's really going on, and how bad it is, or what are the impacts. So we think that is really useful to really make people aware, right? So and like bring some ground truth. So what is really happening, maybe also what are some consequences of certain architecture decisions or protocol decisions and or economic events. Yeah, characterizing and assessing the observed centralization correctly, and yeah, then continue this discussion of root causes, and so with all these different factors that we talked about, so economics, architecture, protocol design, and as you know, there is yeah, also increasing say awareness now at legislators and regulators and so on. And our idea is also to yeah, kind of give them, say, yeah, first of all, good information, but also some kind of like good advice, what is meaningful to do, what can be done technically, and maybe should be done technically in the end. Still, we want to you know, have DINRG as a space where, of course, we want to invite new research ideas, technical solutions. So quite often, you know, people, you know, these days dismiss the word like decentralization technology, and they equate it with blockchain directly. That's probably a bit of an overreaction that is not very useful in a research environment. So we think there is still interesting work that should be looked at, and it's, of course, I mean, it will not be like one silver bullet, but still you can learn many things from looking at specific, you know, proposals, system designs, and how it could be applied to some of these topics. So the last 2 points, I mean, I'm a bit like more like towards like products or outcomes. So surely we want to find a way to document this in a useful way, and then also maybe provide something like recommendations, if possible, you know, how to move away from further consolidation. And thanks to everybody who commented on this on the mail list. So we got a bit of feedback, and yeah, today would be great if we could maybe continue a little bit the discussion. So yeah, people appreciated that the charter is clearer now and more concise, and also thought it's maybe good to not mention specific technologies. Yes. So there was one comment that said, okay, this should not prevent us bringing dedicated technology, but also architecture design examples into discussion. Yes, so that's what I mentioned earlier. So it's going to be important to find a good balance between the, say, more analytic work and then, yeah, kind of constructive proposals on certain aspects. Some people mentioned that, well, there are different places in the, say, IETF community where some of this decentralization tech is being discussed. And there was a suggestion to kind of whether DINRG can help in some way to be a collection point for this. I think this needs to be discussed a little bit more. Because, well, we think this group should really focus on like the internet centralization problem, and of course there are other applications for, say, decentralized technology that yeah, may not be that relevant for us. As a critical comment, somebody said, okay, so the previous focus of the group was like too much on blockchain, and like internet centralization is really too far away from that. So it's questionable whether a rechartering would be in order, or whether we should just start a new group. So we discussed this a bit also with the IAB and with Colin. And so what I I hope I explained earlier is that, well, the idea of this group has always been to, look at internet centralization. In the beginning, it was a bit more, say, technology solution oriented. But then over time, like at least like since 2 years now, we kind of shifted the focus to really tackling the centralization problem or understanding it better. So we don't think a new group or something makes a big difference compared to rechartering. I mean, we have been working on this for 2 years now. We have the people, I think, in the group. So seems to be, at least for us, useful to follow up with or continue with the rechartering. And so a bit of feedback from the IAB review this week, which is actually really good discussion. So and we agree to that. So we really have to think a bit more about how we actually want to achieve these objectives that we mentioned earlier. And I think maybe also one more level of detail in what we want to do or how we want to work could be useful to discuss. In general, the goal of these IETF research groups is to engage the broader research communities. And so the IB, for example, has been working on this topic as well with their IB like programs or activities and so on. The strength of the IETF research groups is typically that we can have continuous research work items and engage these communities, also have meetings elsewhere, and so that the question is a little bit here: what are these communities, and what communities are we missing? And in particular, say the whole economics discussion could call for bringing some additional expertise to this group. So that's maybe something to discuss more. And so these are 2 points I wanted to highlight, and there were a few more. If there's anything else, please bring it up. And with that, we'd like to invite you to share some additional thoughts, maybe suggestions, things we may have missed, or that you would like to see. Some more? I think that's... right, okay. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Niels ten Hoover. Thanks so much for this excellent work. I followed this research group in the beginning of when it was formed and when there was still a lot of distributed technology. I'm very interested in the work that you're now rechartering, which is why I'm back. I was wondering, however, the work under the IAB workshop and faltered a bit. And I think that was because there was a lack, as you pointed out yourself, of economists and legal scholars. And having dabbled a bit in other fields where, like, working on the conversion, it's very hard to get these people to one place, let alone to agree on something, right? Let alone to model or provide solutions, especially in an international environment. So how do you think about addressing that in this research group? So how do you think, are you gonna host intermediary meeting at other conferences, invite policymakers, or it's like, what are your explicit methods or aims of doing that, and also explicit non-aims of doing that?
Well, you can see from here some suggestions. To me personally, I think number one, we need to write. We need to explain to others what the goal of this group is, so that using that as a starting point, we disseminate whatever our goal is to proactively reach out to those people in economy, in regulation. But the very first thing, we need to take a first step, write up what we wanted to do and share with them. And me being from academia, writing is a power. if you read the right stuff. But thank you for excellent suggestion. That's a great point.
Right. So, I mean, these research groups, I mean, they are basically contribution driven, and so it's I mean, don't just wait for Alicia and me to you know, get this work started. So we really need everybody's input, and so we have the possibility to also do, say, unusual things, and say, you know, for example, do by invitation only workshops, or bootstrap things in a relatively quick way if you want to, say, run a workshop somewhere. So these things are all possible, and so we're especially hoping for people who have connections to these communities to help us set something up.
Mark McFadden. So I'm supportive of the rechartering. I think it's a really good idea. I think blockchain really needs to be treated as an example of technology rather than the topic of the research group. So I think refocusing the charter is really a constructive thing to do. And on a personal level, I'm willing to contribute effort in terms of writing drafts for the research group. I think that that's something that a concrete specific step that needs to happen here. The research group has to have some drafts that it regularly discusses, both on the mailing list and in its meetings. So I think that's really important, and that would be something as an objective for San Francisco to continue to do that, to continue to generate enough enthusiasm where people are contributing drafts, because I think the 2021 workshop was extremely successful, but we really haven't built on that success. I mean, it was very successful. The meeting report reflects how much interest there is in the topic. And so I guess my suggestion is to take the results of that meeting report and try to generate not only outreach to other communities who don't normally participate in a research group, which I think is important and a very valuable thing, but also reach out to the people who contributed to that workshop and ask them to be a participant and to contribute concrete text here for this research group. I think that would be extremely important. So I'm very supportive of the rechartering. I don't agree with the comment that I think the rechartering text is appropriate as it stands and doesn't need sort of massive reconsideration. I don't think that's really required here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. So there was some other comment. Somebody talked to me and said, yeah, it would be really useful, I mean, just to have this group to yeah, really document like clear like misdevelopments and like issues that the internet creates due to the centralization and the consequential threats that arise from that, and to have like one group that you know, calls this out. And so that's another idea I received this week.
I was just making sure there was no one else before I came up. No. So hi, Colin Perkins again. So if I'm happy to support the group in this rechartering. I think Niels and to some extent the IAB earlier highlighted the risk here, which is that to do this successfully needs a relatively broad set of expertise, people outside the traditional IETF community. So I would encourage you to make sure to consult widely, and the list here is a good start on this slide, but it's a relative, it hits the community you have traditionally interacted with, and trying to broaden that out I think would be useful. I would encourage you to work with the IAB who maybe have broader contacts and influence to try and reach out to people and reach out to anyone else in the community who can try and get those broader linkages. But yeah, in general, yeah, I'm very supportive of this proposal.
Okay, thanks, Colin.
We're done, right? With any further comments?
Niels ten Hoover again. May I suggest that, because I think where a lot of work in the IAB and that work went wrong because different understandings of centralizations existed. So maybe this might be a too academic approach of like making a draft with different definitions and understandings, almost like a literature review, straddling different fields, and maybe even a kind of taxonomy of what centralization and decentralization means, because then at least we know what we're talking about, what we're measuring, and what we're going of that. I think that would really help to play to different audiences and also explain to ourselves what we're doing. And I'm happy to contribute to that.
Thanks. I mean, as Mark Nottingham pointed out earlier, so this is also a highly political topic, of course, and we have to think about what's the most productive way for us to produce useful and interesting results. And so I think what Jeff Houston mentioned earlier could be also quite important. Maybe not to try too early to arrive at a harmonized point of view or document or something, but also really allow for different opinions, different standpoints, and say, like consistent perspectives from different people, and just have the discussion here. And I think this is one of the virtues of these groups, really, that we can allow all these different formats.
And one of the strengths we have in the IETF is that we don't have to publish consensus documents. We can publish particular viewpoints, provided it's clear where that viewpoint's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. All right. There are no other comments, then many thanks for attending and for the really good discussion today. This went really well. And we identified definitely some points that we should follow up on in the next weeks and at the next meeting. Have a nice rest of the IETF, and hope to see you around. Thanks. Bye-bye.